Welcome back, third graders. We're going to continue our work with fractions today by, as you can see, adding fractions. So, learning target for today is that I can add unlike fractions. What you'll do to show evidence of your learning when we're done with this is that you'll be given some unlike fractions and you'll need to be able to accurately add them, showing your work as you go. So here's a situation in which you would need to add fractions. Lisa ate 1/3 of a pizza and Katie ate 1/6 of that same pizza, so they're sharing it, and it's asking what fraction of the pizza did they eat all together. So that all together is a signal that we are adding. So basically our problem is 1/3 plus 1/6. How much is that all together? Those are unlike fractions because they've got different denominators. So basically, third graders, what we're going to do is to add unlike fractions, first change them to fractions with the same denominator, in other words, like fractions. Once we've got like fractions, then it's easy to add them up. So 1/3 plus 1/6. Right now they are unlike denominators, and I ask myself, what would be easy? What would be an easy denominator to turn them both into? And it would be 6. So I'm going to find an equivalent fraction for 1/3 so that it's got the denominator of 6. 3 times what equals 6, and it's 2. Therefore, I multiply the numerator by the same. 1 times 2, and I get 2/6. So I'm going to use the equivalent fraction of 1/3, which is 2/6, and then add 1/6 to it. So now my new problem is 2/6 plus 1/6. And as I can see from here, if I've got 2/6 and I add one more 6 to that, I'm putting all those 6 together, and I get 3/6. 2/6 plus 1/6 equals 3/6. And then I notice right away that I could write that in simplest form. So whenever we can, when we're adding these fractions, once I get my answer, I ask myself, is this in simplest form? And if it isn't, I'll reduce it down to be in simplest form, as we learned the other day. So here's another problem. 1/4 plus 3/8. These are unlike fractions right now, but I notice 4 and 8, those are nice friendly numbers. I could find an equivalent fraction for 1/4 so that it also has a denominator of 8. So 1/4, I want to find an equivalent fraction so it has the denominator of 8. 4 times what equals 8? And it's 2. So I'm going to multiply the numerator by the same. 2. 1 times 2. So 2/8. So now my new problem is 2/8. So first I made like fractions by changing one, finding the equivalent fraction for one of them so that I've got like fractions. So now my new problem is 2/8 plus 3/8. And looking at this diagram over here, that's showing us 2/8 plus 3/8. So that's showing us that once I've got those like fractions, all I need to do is add the numerators. 2/8 plus 3/8 would give me 5/8. Now, is that in simplest form? Yes. I can't divide both 5 and 8 by the same number to make that fraction or those numbers any smaller. So that is in simplest form. 1/3 plus 2/9. We're currently unlike fractions. Which fraction should I change? 1/3. I could change that. I could find an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 9ths. 3 times what equals 9? And it's 3. 3 times 3 equals 9. So 1 times 3 equals 3. So 3/9 is equivalent to 1/3. So my new problem is going to be 3/9 plus 2/9. 3/9 plus 2/9 equals 5/9. Is that in simplest form? Yes. So the answer is 5/9. Okay, now you take a moment, you look at this. Here, your new problem is 1/2 plus 1/4. First, make like fractions and then add. So pause the video, do that work on a piece of scratch paper or some kind of writing surface, and then come back and check. Since I've got 2 and 4, it would be easy for me to find an equivalent fraction to fourths. 2 times what equals 4? It would be 2 times 2. 2 times 2 equals 4, so 1 times 2 equals 2. So an equivalent fraction to 1/2 is 2/4 plus 1/4 equals 3/4. Is that in simplest form? Yes, 3/4 is the answer. How about 2/5 plus 3/10? Pause the video and solve, and then unpause and check. I'm going to find an equivalent fraction for 2/5 that has the denominator of 10. 5 times what equals 10? It would be 2. So I'm going to do 2 times 2 is 4. So my equivalent fraction is 4/10 plus 3/10. 4/10 plus 3/10 equals 7/10. Is that in simplest form? Yes, I can't divide both the numerator and denominator by the same number to make those numbers any smaller. 3 fractions. Third graders, I would do the same thing. I would put all 3 fractions into like fractions. So I'm noticing 12ths, 5/12, and 1/12. Can I turn this 1/3 into an equivalent fraction with 12ths? I sure can. 3 times what equals 12? It would be 4. 3 times 4 equals 12. So I'm going to multiply the numerator by 4 as well. 1 times 4 is 4. Now that all of my fractions are like fractions, I add up all 3 of the numerators. If I have 5/12 and then I add 4 more to it, I've got 9/12. And then if I add 1 more 12th, that will give me 10/12. Is 10/12 in simplest form? No, I'm looking at those numbers and I'm seeing they're both even numbers. So I know that I can divide both the numerator and denominator by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 12 divided by 2 is 6. So the answer would be 5/6. 5/12 plus 1/3 plus 1/12 equals 5/6. First, I found like fractions. I found equivalent fractions so that all of my fractions were like fractions, and then I can add the numerators. How about 2/10 plus 3/10 plus 1/2? Pause the video and you solve that, and then come back and check. Since I've got 2 fractions with a denominator of 10, and I can easily turn that 1/2 into a fraction with a denominator of 10, I ask myself 2 times what equals 10? And it's 5, so I'm going to multiply the numerator by 5 as well. So an equivalent fraction to 1/2 is 5/10. Now I've got 2/10 plus 3/10 plus 5/10. Well, 2/10 plus 3/10 is 5/10. And then if I add another 5/10 to that, I've got 10/10. If I have 10 tenths, I have 1 whole. So the answer to this problem of 2 tenths plus 3 tenths plus 1/2 is 1. I've eaten the whole pizza. What's 3 sevenths plus 4 sevenths? Since these are already like fractions, all I need to do is add the numerators. 7 sevenths. This also means 1 whole. Okay, final practice problem. What's the answer to this? Solve and then come back and check. I'm looking at these denominators and I'm thinking it would be easy to make them like fractions by having a denominator of 12. So I'm going to find an equivalent fraction for 1/3. 3 times what equals 12? It's 3 times 4, so I'm going to multiply the numerator by 4 as well. 1 times 4 is 4. So now my new problem is 5/12 plus 4/12. That equals 9/12. Is that in simplest form? No, I'm looking at these numbers and I know they're both multiples of 3. So I'm going to reduce that by dividing both the numerator and denominator by 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. So the answer to this problem is 3/4. So there we have it, third graders. We are adding fractions. We are specifically adding unlike fractions by first making our fractions like fractions and then adding the numerators. So your practice options today are some worksheet pages. If you have been doing that and you like that and you have access to printing, there's 2 pages. You can print and practice on paper. If you practice on paper, there are answers on the very last slide so you can check once you're done. There's also IXL, so if you don't have access to printing or don't want to print, there are a couple of options for IXL practice. You just need some scratch paper or some writing utensils near you to practice. And then today, to show your learning, you're going to go back to Seesaw, and there's an activity there called adding fractions. So that's how you're going to show your understanding. And remember that not only is the correct answer what we're looking for, but how you got there. So show your work. Show your changing of a fraction into an equivalent fraction so that you've got like fractions, and then you can add. So there you have it, third graders. Adding fractions today. See you back here tomorrow when we'll be subtracting. There are answers